A 30-year career does not collapse overnight, unless something buried for decades finally comes to light. Before we go deeper, stay with us. If any detail feels inconsistent, leave a comment. If you want the next file opened the moment it surfaces, subscribe. In stories like this, the first version of events is rarely the last. In the early hours of the scandal, the entertainment world did not look like a red carpet. It looked like a crime scene built from screens. 1,000 small windows, 1,000 restless hands. Clips replayed until the faces blurred. Statements were read as if they were confessions. Silence was weighed like evidence. Alec Su had spent more than 3 decades cultivating a reputation that seemed engineered to resist damage. The public knew the polished figure. Disciplined, charming, reliable. A veteran whose presence could anchor a film set, calm a press line, reassure investors. Fans believed they had watched his life unfold in real time. They had memorized the arc. They had defended it. Yet reputations do not break because of one rumor. They break when old whispers find a new instrument. The name that turned speculation into panic was Yu Menglong. Younger, brighter, more volatile. The kind of rising star the industry celebrates and fears in the same breath. His death had arrived as a shock that never fully resolved into certainty. People grieved, then argued. Journalists circled. Commentators offered theories. Even political figures outside the region had been pulled into the discourse, as though a celebrity tragedy could be proof of a wider fracture in public trust. For years, the story remained a fog of unanswered questions. Then the fog began to move. What came next did not resemble an official investigation. It resembled something newer and, in its own way, more relentless. Online communities began assembling a narrative from fragments. Leaked messages, vague screenshots, deleted posts, grainy videos, and timelines that stitched together public appearances with private gaps. They were not waiting for authorities to speak. They were building their own docket. We should be careful here. Leaks are not verdicts. Accusations are not proof. And yet, a pattern can be persuasive even before it is verified. The claims focused on 3 recurring threads. First, professional tension. People pointed to old events where Alec Su and Yu Menglong crossed paths. Moments now reinterpreted through the lens of rivalry and influence. Casting decisions, project access, quiet interventions that could shape a younger career without leaving fingerprints. Second, money. Not a single dramatic transaction that announces guilt, but alleged movements through intermediaries and structures designed to blur origin and intent. The timing, the internet insisted, aligned too neatly with key disruptions in Yu Menglong's schedule. The kind of alignment that keeps investigators awake, because coincidence has a habit of wearing disguises. Third, meetings, private rooms, restricted gatherings. Faces in the background that appeared again and again, as if the same small constellation kept orbiting every critical moment. The footage, fans claimed, was the closest thing to a shadow ledger. Redacted, unverified. Still, it spread because it answered the oldest craving in scandal, the need to see. As the story accelerated, the industry responded with the familiar choreography. Statements emphasizing integrity, requests for restraint, promises of internal review. But the public did not hear reassurance. The public heard strategy. And this is where the atmosphere changes, not because a court has spoken, not because an investigator has filed charges. It changes because a reputation can be tried in real time by a global audience that believes it has finally found the hidden door. When the question becomes not what happened, but who benefited, every absence becomes suspicious. Every friendship becomes a potential channel. Every old compliment becomes a coded threat. In that climate, a legacy is not measured by awards or longevity. It is measured by what it can withstand when the lights go out. The question was no longer whether Alec Su had done something illegal. It was whether he had been standing inside a system that made tragedy inevitable. The first crack in a monument is rarely visible from the outside. For 3 decades, Alec Su had not merely worked in entertainment. He had occupied it. His name carried the weight of predictability. And in an industry that survives on risk, predictability is currency. Producers trusted him to deliver. Directors trusted him to adapt. Sponsors trusted him to remain uncontroversial. Fans trusted him to remain familiar. The public image was not a performance within the work. It was the work. That is why the backlash did not begin as a debate about innocence or guilt. It began as a kind of cognitive fracture. People did not want to decide what Alec Su had done. They wanted to decide whether the Alec Su they believed in had ever existed. According to multiple accounts circulating online, Yu Menglong entered this ecosystem as the kind of figure that unsettles hierarchies without touching them. He was younger, rapidly ascending, openly confident, and increasingly difficult to contain. In celebrity culture, that combination can be celebrated as authenticity, then punished as insolence, depending on who feels threatened. Their paths, it was reported, crossed publicly more than a decade ago at a high-profile film festival. The images from that time, now recycled endlessly, look harmless. Smiles, formal handshakes, a mentor-like posture from a veteran toward a rising name. Yet in the wake of Yu Menglong's death, those frames became evidence by reinterpretation. The internet is skilled at converting posture into motive. We should treat this carefully. Public photographs do not contain intent, but in a scandal built from inference, symbolism often becomes more influential than facts. The central claim behind the early phase of the controversy was not murder. It was influence. Fans and self-appointed investigators began focusing on what they described as gatekeeping, a system in which career trajectories are shaped less by merit than by permission. In that system, a veteran star can function like a switchboard, not by issuing direct orders, but by deciding whose calls get answered. Leaked casting notes were referenced repeatedly in fan discussions. The idea was simple and corrosive. Yu Menglong had pursued roles that never materialized, while projects allegedly tied to Alec Su moved forward with suspicious ease. No document on its own proved sabotage. Yet the narrative did not require proof of sabotage. It required proof of proximity to decision-making. In this story, proximity is the first form of suspicion. Several anonymous insider accounts quoted and reposted across platforms described an environment where rising talent could be managed through informal channels. Meetings that do not appear on calendars. Suggestions delivered as advice, then enforced as expectation. A quiet message from a respected figure that changes a producer's mind without ever sounding like a threat. If Yu Menglong was ambitious, he was also, by reputation, outspoken. That matters. The industry has always been capable of absorbing talent. It is far less capable of absorbing defiance. A rising star who refuses to accept guidance can quickly become, in the language of power, a problem in need of a solution. And this is where the tone shifts from gossip to something colder. Because once people believe that an invisible system exists, they begin looking for its architecture. They begin searching for recurring names and consistent patterns. They begin asking who benefits when a project changes hands, when a schedule is altered, when a narrative is redirected. Alec Su's alleged influence in that context became the first structural pillar. Not because he was the only powerful person involved, but because he was powerful enough to make other powerful people comfortable. A veteran who can be trusted to cooperate, to protect relationships, to keep a room calm, even when decisions inside that room are ruthless. Reports of industry politics were not new. They had been dismissed for years as the predictable resentment of those excluded from opportunity. What changed after Yu Menglong's death was the intensity with which old claims were re-examined. Every rumor acquired a timeline. Every grievance acquired a theory. Fans began compiling lists of unexplained coincidences. Appearances where Yu Menglong seemed absent without explanation. Projects he was rumored to have pursued, then abruptly abandoned. Moments when he publicly shifted tone from confidence to caution, as though he had received a warning. Whether those moments had innocent explanations mattered less than how they fit within the emerging pattern. Patterns are seductive. They offer order when reality feels random. In this phase of the narrative, the shadow network remained undefined, but its outline was already forming. The idea of intermediaries appeared early. Managers, producers, fixers, and unnamed figures who move between celebrities and decision-makers. These are the people who can enforce a decision without owning it. The people who can make pressure feel like inevitability. It was within that framework that Alec Su's name began to feel less like a celebrity and more like a coordinate. Still, the most dangerous part of the story was not what anyone claimed to know. It was what no one could disprove. The allegations were constructed to survive contradiction. Influence is hard to document. Control is often informal, and intimidation can be disguised as advice. By the time analysts and commentators began speaking publicly, the scandal had already acquired its gravitational pull. Projects tied to Su were rumored to be reviewed. Endorsements were rumored to be paused. Colleagues were rumored to be distancing themselves. None of this required official confirmation to have impact. In a reputation economy, hesitation is a signal. And yet, at this stage, the case was still missing the element that turned suspicion into obsession. It needed something that looked like a mechanism, something that suggested coordination, not merely conflict, something that could transform vague whispers into a structured accusation. Influence, when left unchecked, does not need intent to become dangerous. The idea of a shadow network does not announce itself. It emerges slowly through repetition. Once online investigators began looking beyond personalities and toward structures, the story changed shape. The focus shifted from what Alec Su might have done to how influence could move without leaving signatures. Power, they argued, rarely operates through direct commands. It operates through intermediaries, through rooms that do not appear on schedules, through conversations that are never recorded, because they are never supposed to exist. Names began to surface with increasing consistency. Gawa Yu, Duchong, Singi. Individually, they were not celebrities. They did not need to be. Their relevance came from where they appeared, and how often. In leaked footage, in background shots, in meeting logs recovered from fragmented data. The same figures appeared again and again, sometimes beside Alec Su, sometimes in proximity to Yu Menglong, sometimes positioned between both worlds. This repetition mattered more than identity. In network analysis, frequency is meaning. According to fan-compiled timelines, several private gatherings took place during critical periods in Yu Menglong's career. These were not public events. They were described as closed-door meetings attended by producers, financiers, and individuals whose official roles were deliberately ambiguous. The purpose of these gatherings, according to anonymous accounts, was not negotiation. It was alignment. Alignment is a term that hides intent behind efficiency. What troubled observers was not simply that Alec Su appeared in some of these contexts. It was that his presence coincided with moments of sudden change. Projects Yu Menglong was rumored to pursue disappeared without explanation. Travel plans shifted. Public appearances were cancelled or altered. To an industry outsider, these might look like routine scheduling issues. To those searching for patterns, they looked like outcomes. The financial dimension added weight to the suspicion. Investigators poring over leaked records claimed to identify transactions moving through shell companies and offshore structures linked to individuals later associated with Yu Menglong's final days. No document named a crime. No transfer listed a motive. Yet the timing was, as many repeated, difficult to ignore. Funds appeared to move shortly before key decisions. Accounts changed hands before schedules changed. Intermediaries surfaced where transparency should have existed. In isolation, each element could be dismissed. Together, they suggested coordination. This is where the narrative hardened. A coordinated system does not require a single architect. It requires participants who understand their roles. One controls access. One manages money. One shapes messaging. One ensures compliance. The system functions not because everyone agrees, but because no one wants to be excluded from its protection. Within this framework, Alec Su was no longer portrayed as a mastermind. He was portrayed as a stabilizer, a figure whose reputation could normalize a room, a veteran whose attendance could signal legitimacy to others present. If a decision needed cover, his presence provided it. Still, caution is necessary. Presence is not proof of intent. Influence does not equal command. But when repeated interactions align with repeated outcomes, the distinction becomes harder to defend. Leaked video fragments intensified this tension. Grainy, heavily redacted, and often lacking context, The footage nonetheless carried psychological power. Viewers watched Alec Su seated among industry figures now labeled as shadow actors. They watched body language. They watched who spoke and who listened. They watched who deferred and who did not. In the absence of audio clarity, interpretation filled the gap. Fans dubbed the material the shadow files. The name mattered. It framed the footage as revelation rather than rumor. Each clip was slowed, annotated, cross-referenced with public calendars and social media timestamps. The process was meticulous and merciless. The goal was not entertainment. It was construction of narrative authority. As these compilations circulated, mainstream media faced a dilemma. Ignore them and appear complicit. Report them and risk amplifying unverified claims. Many chose a cautious middle ground, framing the story as an example of unprecedented, fan-driven scrutiny, rather than a definitive exposé. But caution did not slow momentum. Insider accounts began to echo the patterns identified by fans. Anonymous voices described meetings where decisions were made about project assignments, public statements, and the management of Yu Menglong's visibility. Some claimed assistants and security personnel were instructed to follow protocols that limited autonomy under the guise of protection. Others spoke of warnings delivered indirectly, messages designed to be understood without ever being written down. None of these accounts named Alec Su as the author of these actions. That distinction was repeated often, and yet his proximity to the network made neutrality difficult to sustain. Because in a system built on influence, silence is rarely passive. The entertainment industry responded with signs of strain. Projects involving Su were reportedly delayed or quietly reviewed. Endorsements entered reassessment. Former collaborators limited public association. No one issued accusations. They did not need to. Distance itself became a form of commentary. What emerged was not a case for criminal guilt, but a case for ethical collapse. A suggestion that Yu Menglong's life and career may have been shaped, constrained, and ultimately endangered by a web of interests operating beyond public scrutiny. A web in which Alec Su was not alone, but not absent. And this is the most unsettling aspect of the shadow network narrative. It does not require villains. It requires participants who believe they are only maintaining order. As the footage spread and the timelines grew more detailed, one conclusion became unavoidable. The story was no longer about individual rivalry. It was about mechanism. No crime had been proven, yet every piece pointed to coordination rather than coincidence. What ultimately transformed suspicion into a global phenomenon was not a leak. It was participation. As traditional media hesitated, online communities accelerated. Fans did not wait for confirmation. They built frameworks. Forums evolved into research hubs. Social platforms became archives. What began as speculation hardened into methodology. Timestamps were aligned. Locations were mapped. Financial breadcrumbs were layered over public calendars. The investigation did not belong to a newsroom. It belonged to the crowd. This shift mattered because it changed who controlled the narrative. Communities created publicly accessible timelines that charted Alec Su's movements alongside those of intermediaries and figures now associated with Yu Menglong's final years. Each data point on its own was fragile. Together, they formed a structure that felt increasingly difficult to dismiss. The methodology was repetitive and deliberate. Cross-reference, verify, annotate, share, correct, repeat. Video footage became the backbone of this effort. Clips surfaced first on encrypted platforms, then migrated rapidly to mainstream social media. They were short, incomplete, and often heavily redacted, yet they carried symbolic weight. Viewers were invited not merely to watch, but to analyze. Frame by frame, gesture by gesture, position by position. The emphasis was not on what was said, but on who was present. Fans noted unexplained absences from public events. They highlighted deleted posts and recovered messages that suggested coordination rather than coincidence. Geolocation data was compared against travel records and industry schedules. When overlaps appeared, they were flagged. When patterns repeated, they were amplified. This was not chaos. It was crowdsourced discipline. Hashtags became filing systems. Interactive maps charted relationships between Alec Su, Yu Menglong, and a growing list of shadow figures. Annotated images circulated globally, each one presenting a hypothesis rather than a conclusion. The language was careful, but the implication was not. Something was being managed behind closed doors, and the management had left traces. Traditional journalists, watching this unfold, faced a new reality. Fan-compiled dossiers were now influencing public perception faster than official reporting. To ignore them was to fall behind. To repeat them without verification was to risk credibility. Many chose a third option, reporting on the phenomenon itself. They described it as unprecedented, a fan-driven investigation that rivaled professional intelligence work in scale, if not authority. Analysts warned that this new dynamic had altered the balance of power. Reputations could now be dismantled, not by courts but by consensus. For Alec Su, the impact was immediate and tangible. Reports emerged of postponed projects and quietly reviewed endorsements. Collaborators became cautious. Statements were drafted with surgical precision. His management emphasized integrity, professionalism, and cooperation with any inquiry. The wording was calm. The response online was not. Fans dissected every sentence. What was denied? What was not addressed? What was left ambiguous? In the absence of definitive answers, interpretation filled the space. Memes spread alongside timelines, commentary mixed with analysis. The scandal became participatory theater, and the audience believed it was finally seeing backstage. What made this moment particularly volatile was that it no longer required new evidence to sustain momentum. The existing archive was enough. Every delay was reframed as evasion. Every denial was reframed as strategy. In this environment, neutrality became indistinguishable from complicity. Industry insiders added fuel, intentionally or otherwise. Anonymous testimonies describe meetings where decisions were made about Yu Menglong's projects and public visibility. Others hinted at pressure placed on staff to follow instructions without documentation. None of these accounts accused Alec Su of direct wrongdoing. They did something more corrosive. They placed him consistently inside the room. The cumulative effect was destabilizing. A 3-decade career, once defined by stability, now appeared precarious. Not because guilt had been proven, but because trust had been disrupted. In a reputation economy, disruption is enough. Observers began to note the irony. The same digital platforms that had helped build Alec Su's global following were now enabling his scrutiny. Fan culture had evolved from celebration to oversight. The boundary between audience and investigator had dissolved, and with that dissolution came a final, unsettling realization. The scandal was no longer dependent on whether Alec Su would be cleared or condemned. The process itself had become the verdict. His legacy was now inseparable from the questions being asked, regardless of how they were answered. In the digital age, exposure does not wait for permission. It accumulates until silence collapses under its own weight. In the digital age, silence is no longer neutral. It is evidence waiting to be interpreted. The final stage of a scandal is rarely resolution. It is recalibration. By the time the dust began to settle, one fact had become unavoidable. The question surrounding Alec Su was no longer confined to legality. Courts determine guilt. Audiences determine legacy. And in this case, the audience had already rewritten the terms. No official finding had declared wrongdoing. No document had closed the file. Yet the accumulation of timelines, meetings, financial coincidences, and silent gaps had altered perception in a way that could not be reversed by a single statement. The damage, if it could be called that, did not come from proof. It came from plausibility. Yu Menglong's death, once treated as an isolated tragedy, had transformed into a symbol, not merely of a life cut short, but of what can happen when ambition collides with opaque systems. Whether he was actively targeted or gradually constrained mattered less than the environment that surrounded him, an environment in which decisions were made quietly, where influence traveled faster than accountability, where protection and control often shared the same language. For Alec Su, this environment had been familiar territory. A veteran does not survive 3 decades in entertainment without learning how rooms operate when cameras are off. That knowledge is not inherently criminal. It is often rewarded. But when tragedy enters the frame, neutrality becomes a liability. The most unsettling realization is this: The story does not require Alec Su to be a villain to be consequential. It requires only that he occupied a position where silence, presence, or compliance carried weight. In systems governed by influence, outcomes can be shaped without explicit intent. Harm can emerge without a single hand pushing. This is why the scandal resonates beyond celebrity culture. It touches something broader and more uncomfortable. The idea that systems can produce damage, while every participant insists they were only doing their job. That responsibility can be diluted across meetings, intermediaries, and procedures until it becomes invisible. Fan-led investigations forced that invisibility into the open, not with authority but with persistence. They demonstrated that power no longer controls the entire narrative, that digital communities armed with data and coordination can challenge reputations once considered untouchable. This does not guarantee truth, but it guarantees scrutiny. And scrutiny changes behavior. Projects pause. Endorsements hesitate. Relationships cool. None of these actions require a verdict. They require uncertainty. In modern entertainment, uncertainty is enough to stall momentum indefinitely. As for Yu Menglong, his legacy now exists in a space far larger than his filmography. He has become a reference point in debates about transparency, protection, and the cost of ambition within closed systems. His name no longer belongs only to fans. It belongs to a question that will not go away. Perhaps the most disturbing truth to emerge from this story is not whether Alec Su is guilty or innocent. It is how easily a system can reshape lives while remaining structurally intact. Individuals rotate through roles. Power persists. In the end, the scandal leaves us with no clean conclusion, only a choice of interpretation. Was this the downfall of a star, or the exposure of a mechanism that has always existed, finally visible under the harsh light of collective attention? Perhaps the most unsettling truth is not what Alec Su did or did not do. It is how easily a system can destroy lives while everyone involved insists they were only doing their job.